Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Architizer live webinar. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you've attended one of our previous live talks, welcome back. It's so great to have you with us. I'm Paul Keskes, Editor-in-Chief at Architizer, and today I'm thrilled to welcome back Michael Ehrman, Professor of Architecture at Virginia Tech and the founder of Amber Book, to talk about the 3 must-knows for becoming a licensed architect. We'll be exploring the sometimes very long and winding path to becoming an architect and learning about how to navigate the challenges and embrace the opportunities that lie on that licensing journey. While we wait for the room to fill up, you know the drill by now. You're invited to say hi in the chat box on the right side of your screen and let us know where you're from. And most of you are likely familiar with our live events by now, but for those who are new, here are some quick tips about this platform. If you have any technical difficulties with the stream, a quick refresh of your browser usually resolves any issues. But if not, you can click on the help icon in the bottom left corner, and you'll see a few options for improving your picture, the sound, and so on. We'll also send you a recording of the talk straight to your inbox after the event, so you can catch up on anything you missed. You can type anything you like in the chat, but if you have a question for Michael, please click on the questions tab on the bottom right of your screen, and then type your questions there so it can be saved for the Q&A at the end. Throughout the presentation, actually no polls today, so we're good on polls, I believe. So yeah, now without further ado, I want to welcome Michael back to the stage. What have you got in store for us today, Michael?
Well, we're going to be talking, Paul, about 3 must-knows for becoming an architect. And the 3 must-knows pretty much follow the same 3-legged stool that you might expect, where we're talking about education and kind of the degree in architecture, the professional degree in architecture in particular. We're going to be talking about work and practical experience, and we're going to be talking about the 6 examinations, the ARE exams that one has to tackle to become an architect. And we're going to do it in data. So those of you guys who are data nerds, we're going to kind of look at this stuff in data, primarily from NCARB's NCARB by the numbers. So NCARB are the folks who administer the licensure exams. And I think I would welcome you guys to if you're kind of if you're the 1 in 10 of us that's kind of can make an Onion headline, then you can. I'm going to be asking you to make headlines for the data graphs I show, and so in each case you'll have about 20 seconds or 30 seconds to do it. I'll give you 10 seconds left, so you'll look over the data, and then you'll type in the data. You'll type in the headline of the chart that you think is appropriate, and I think for most of us are not that funny that quickly. So your assignment is to actually just type in what you think the headline ought to be. But for some of you guys are a little bit snarky, and you guys are welcome. I was just going to do the data, and I was listening to a podcast, and there was a guy. He was from New York, and he was talking live to a group from Boston, and he mentioned something about New York, and the people from Boston started booing him because he mentioned New York. And he told everyone to shut up because Boston is just like Philadelphia, but with worse sandwiches and smarter assholes. And I thought, if you're that quick, I think you should be able to, share that with everybody anyway. So go ahead and let's get started. So this is something I created a couple years ago. NCARB, again, the people who administer the architect registration exam, the licensure exam for architects, they publish basically just a bunch of data, essentially rows and columns of data, explaining from different schools what is the likelihood, what's the pass rates for these different schools. So the average pass rates at the time, they're a little higher now, were about 54%, I think. 53%, something like that, which means that if you took one of the given 6 exams for licensure, in each exam on average, you had a 53% chance of passing. And so I decided I would rank the schools, which actually turned out to be kind of nice for me, because for the undergraduate schools on the left, Virginia Tech, the school I teach at, is number 3. It's number 9 among graduate schools. And so here is the full ranking of undergraduate programs. And it's pretty remarkable, not just that the overall national average pass rate is fairly low here, that is here, but that the schools that have the highest pass rates are often 3 times the pass rates, especially in the graduate program, as the schools that have the lowest pass rates. So the standard deviation is actually quite high. And so go ahead and take a look at this and see if you can find your school in terms of pass rates. And this is just the undergraduate. We'll look at this for 10 seconds more. If you want to see the full rankings yourself, I'm putting it on the chat right now. So there's the link. And I just put it on my own website, and it must be catching on because in the last few months, I've had actually several people call me and ask me where they ought to go to school. These are the graduate ones I'm going to show you now. You may have to kind of zoom in. But several people have called me in the last few months, which, up from 0 people in the previous year and a half. And so the internet must have found this somehow, and they've asking me where to go to school. And if you are someone who is thinking about either going back to graduate school for architecture, or just going to undergraduate for architecture, or not sure what you want to do, you can put your question in the questions, or we can talk. I think we may be able to unmute you at the end. And I can share with you what I know by reputation. I obviously don't know all 107 schools, but I do know that, for instance, Texas A&M and Clemson are known to be good places to go to study healthcare architecture. I do know that Notre Dame and, to a lesser extent, University of Miami are good places to go to study kind of classical architecture. I do know that University of Oregon and Harvard and Berkeley and, frankly, Virginia Tech are good places to go to study building systems and sustainability and thermal and that kind of thing. All right, so there's education, there's experience, and there's examination. Let's continue to look at education. So here's our first graph. Go ahead and take a look at it. You have 15 seconds, and then I'm going to let you know when 15 seconds is up, and then you have about 10 more seconds to write the headline. All right, go ahead and write your headline. This is going to be way more interesting. It's going to be way more interesting for you if you're actually engaged. So write a headline, even if it's a stupid one. We're looking for Uber Eats part-time jobs. See, that's very funny. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, this is the number of people who are enrolled in an NAAB accredited program. So let me explain the accreditation process. So there are, as we saw, 90 accredited undergraduate programs, 107 accredited graduate programs. Maybe it was a few less than 90, maybe it was 60 undergrad programs. But anyhow, to become a licensed architect, which you need a license to be able to stamp drawings and to be able to call yourself an architect, and to be able to, there has to be at least one licensed architect in every firm to kind of certify that a set of drawings is appropriate. You have to, there are different paths, and it varies by state. But in most states, you need to have a degree that has been granted to you from an NAAB accredited program. National Architecture or something, National Architects Accreditation Board, I think is what it is, NAAB. And it's one of a few sister organizations to the AIA, and some people do an undergraduate program in architecture that's 4 years, that's non-NAAB accredited, which means you cannot become licensed in most of those states, although in some you can. And then you can do a graduate program that is NAAB accredited to become eligible for licensure in the future. Some places like Virginia Tech have a 5-year undergraduate program also, so that if you want to be licensed after undergraduate but want to go an extra year for undergraduate, you can go that route as well. My colleagues will swear to you that it's way better to get an undergraduate degree in architecture because it's 5 years instead of 6, because the 4-year undergraduate non-accredited degree plus a 2-year accredited degree is the other path. I think that it really probably doesn't matter. I think that if you like school, you probably ought to plan on getting a master's degree, and if you don't like school, you probably shouldn't get a master's degree, and that that should probably maybe dictate which path you go. But an architect with a 5-year undergraduate or an architect with a 6-year total graduate degree seems like pretty close call to me. That's this number. In terms of what is 30,000, I mean, about 30,000 people a year buy an electric vehicle, about 30,000 people a year open a small business, about that many people file for bankruptcy every year, about that many become a licensed pilot or publish a book or participate in a clinical trial or become that's about how many immigrants become U.S. citizens every year. So it's a sizable number. But of course, we're actually pretty small. We're going to talk about that relative to other professions that are aligned, that are kind of our cousins. All right. So our next one, you have 15 seconds to look at it, and then another 10 seconds or so to write your headline. All right, you have 10 seconds to write your headline. All right, NCARB's headline for this is that most architects have a degree from an NAAB accredited program. So again, all the people in the dark blue, this is between 0% and 100%, and this is the percent of new architects we're talking about. So of new architects in 2023, 42% hold a degree from an NAAB accredited program. 45% have both an accredited and non-accredited degree. Now there are programs, including at my school, where you can get a degree. In architecture, a graduate degree in architecture, if you have an undergraduate degree in something other than architecture. So there's a third path. So one path is to do a 4-year undergraduate in architecture and then a 2-year graduate program in architecture, nominally. One path is to do a 5-year undergraduate degree in architecture. One path is to do a 4-year undergraduate degree in something other than architecture, and then typically a 3 or 3.5 or 4-year degree in architecture, a graduate degree in architecture. And then you see down here about 13% of people. So about, about 45%-ish have a degree, about 45%-ish have an unaccredited and then an accredited degree. Accredited is typically the master's degree. And about 13% have no degree. And can you get a license with no degree? As I mentioned, yes, in some states you can. Let's take a look. So in this one, I think I probably have to tell you a little bit about this one before you can make your headline. So the percentage that you're looking at is the percentage of licensed architects in the state, in a given state, that that do not have an NAAB accredited degree. And so you can take a look at these, and then you have about 10 seconds and then come up with your headline. And while you're doing that, see if you can find the outlier. What's the outlier in these? There's one state in particular. The states that are light blue do not are states that do not where you can become licensed without an NAAB accredited degree. And yeah, Paul found it. Paul found the outlier. Wisconsin is an outlier. So you see the ones that have that don't necessarily require a degree. It doesn't mean that it's easy to not have a degree. So you see in a state like Vermont, it's 3% of architects don't have an accredited degree. But you see over here in Wisconsin, it's 71% of architects don't have a degree. In Wisconsin, last time I checked, you can actually start taking your exams while you're in school. I've actually had several students do that. We hired someone here at Amber Book probably a good time to talk about Amberbook. I'm the creator of Amberbook. We have exam prep for the 6 exams that you need to get licensed. We've enrolled over 40,000 people, which is a lot of people when you consider how many architects there are. We have kind of fairly fun, animated, comprehensive exam prep. But we hired a student named Jack. He was a 4th-year undergraduate student at Virginia Tech, but he was quite good. And I hired him for the summer, and I said, I need you to go through Amberbook. That's our course, and I need you to take at the time 65 very long videos we have, and I need you to break them up into so that it's now 1,300 smaller videos. And so he was going through and just editing videos all summer, and he said, "Well, I'm doing this. Do you mind if I, since I'm going through the course anyway, do you mind if I take my exams?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "But you're going to first have to figure out if you can do that." And he said, "I think there's an exception in Wisconsin where you don't have to be in school. Wisconsin's very lenient. And there's really no reason you can't, in most cases. I don't want to swear by it, but in most cases right now, there's no reason you can't get pursue licensure in one state. And then typically you can get reciprocity, and then California is a little bit more difficult, but you can get reciprocity and transfer your license to another state, provided you meet the requirements of that state as well. But you're going to want to look into that specifically for you, because it may be that if you get your license in Wisconsin, you may not be able to transfer, and you don't have an architecture degree, accredited architecture degree, you may not be able to transfer it to Kentucky or North Carolina or Nebraska or whatever other states that don't necessarily allow you to be licensed without an NAAB accredited degree. But anyhow, he went ahead and registered in Wisconsin, and as a 4th-year undergraduate, took all 6 exams, passed all 6, and then when he went to look for jobs, he had already passed all his exams. It was not hard at all for him to get a job. They were pretty impressed by that. He wound up getting a job in New York. All right, you have 15 seconds. You have 20 seconds, and then to look over it, and then 10 seconds to write your headline. All right, so NCARB's title for this one was over half of new architects have more than 1 degree. So up top, on the top of that, 2023 up top with the 4% is how many have 3 or more degrees, and then 2 degrees is 50%, and 1 degree, and then of course there's some that have no degrees. So about half have more than 1 degree, so that's not uncommon. But about half only have 1 degree, so that's not uncommon either. Go ahead and take 10 seconds to look over this one. So it's about a 60-40 split. 60% go to public universities and get their architecture degree. 40% attend private universities and get an architecture degree. The top 4 schools, according to NCARB, attended by architects who were licensed in 2023 were my university, Virginia Tech, University of Oregon, University of Michigan, and Cal Poly. Of course, those are 4 of the largest schools. Virginia Tech has me, and University of Oregon has a lot of the authors of books like Meeb, and I think building fundamentals of building construction, and a few others that are used in studying these. Are the authors often are professors at University of Oregon, so that's not super surprising either. All right, I think we already did this one. All right, these are different IPAL, and if you went through the IPAL program, I would love for you to share on the chat your experience. For those who don't know, the IPAL program is ostensibly a program within the university, where within the university setting and within the university curriculum, you can become licensed. So typically what happens is an architect attends a school that's an NAAB accredited degree. Then she goes to work and accumulates enough hours, and concurrently can be taking the exams, although oftentimes people wait a little bit too long to take the exams. More on that in a little bit. But if you went to IPAL, please share with us what your experience was going to IPAL program. So an IPAL program is where after you graduate, basically, as far as I can tell, it's just more tuition because it's not really a shortcut. You finish your degree and you're still working, then you're working and you're paying tuition at the university. And you see many of these are in bigger cities but it's not, as far as I can tell, it's not really a shortcut at all. It's just a way for the universities to be involved, which seems like a good thing, to be involved in helping you study for your exams. It seems like an expensive thing, but a good thing. I'm just not sure. I have never talked to anyone who's gone through an IPAL program. So if you have, please share that. All right, now we're going to move on to the practical experience or kind of working phase of becoming an architect. So to become an architect, you have to work. You have to accumulate 3,750 hours or something. But the 3,750 hours or whatever it is pretty specific, where you need certain hours in certain categories. So it's not like the first 3,750 hours that you're going to be working in a firm is automatically going to get you then to satisfy your work experience. It typically takes people 3, 4, 5 years if they're really working towards it to get the hours that they need. But this is, I'll put the website that this is. There's actually, you can find out AIA has a salary calculator where there's like a little pull down where in this case, I went down to architect level 2. There's a description here that says an architect level 2 has at least 6 years of related experience and an architecture degree. And then you can see the 50th percentile, which is a median, the 25th percentile salary, the 75th percentile salary. And if you want to look at it by region, you can look at region as well. So Irvin said, I was an IPAL student. I think the idea sounds good, but the universities really need to dedicate resources and support. I opted to finish school in 5 years and forego the IPAL curriculum. That is my sense, is that a lot of people who start the IPAL program don't finish it, but it's just a sense. It's a fairly new program. And by fairly new, I mean, it's really kind of, I don't know when it first started, but it's expanded from, I think it was, maybe 10 years ago, it was probably 8 or 9 schools, and now it's, dozens. And then of course it may take a few years to get people through it. So if you have an IPAL experience, and if it was a good one, especially share with us what school you went to so that other people can think about doing an IPAL program from that school. Anyhow, what I went ahead and did is I went ahead and punched in different, I went to it wasn't hard. I just went to the different drop-down menus and wanted to kind of look at how much architects make. So this is a median annual compensation for different levels of architects. On the left-hand side, I'll go ahead and read them. And you can look at the numbers as I read them. So you can see what each of these people make. So starting from the left, it says, hold on, I'm going to blow this up a little bit so that I can read it more clearly. All right, it says recent college graduate, not licensed. So 59,000 is kind of a recent college graduate who is just coming out. And then the 67,000 is architectural staff, not licensed. So 3 years experience. So someone with not only 3 years experience would make about 67,000 as a median. Then architect who's licensed with 3 years experience. Then architectural staff, so not licensed, with 6 years experience. Then a licensed architect with 6 years experience. Then an unlicensed architect with 9 years experience. Then an architect licensed with 9 years experience. Then a senior architectural staff, so not licensed and more than 12 years experience at 101,630. Then a senior architect, and feel free to write your snarky headline at any time. Then a senior architect with 12 years experience is 118,000, so about $120,000 if you are a senior architect at median nationwide. And then the title project designer is about 85,000, senior project designer about 125,000, project manager 100,000. Senior project manager, 127,000. Director of design, director of operations, about 155,000. And COO, managing principal, and CEO or president is somewhere on the order of like 165,000. And of course, you can go to that website that I linked, or you can just type in AIA salary calculator at any time, and you can look. I'm always surprised by how few people know about this. And you can look at it. My headline for this is that architects don't make that much, at least at the senior level. This is not going to be surprising to those of you guys who are in the profession. For those of you guys thinking of getting in the profession, you should probably know that you won't starve, and you'll work long hours and have little job security and little compensation. However, most of us really like this stuff. So there are some intrinsic benefits to becoming an architect, but you should know what you're in for. My sense was that this first number, 59,000 median coming out of school, was a good deal higher than it has been recently. But I found the data from 2018, and it actually was only about 11% more, but inflation's been about 25% since then. So I think it actually used to be a little bit better to start. My sense was that it had gotten better, but after looking at that, I'm not so sure that the data supports that assertion. So anyhow, you can go look. Probably I lost 2/3 of you guys who are like looking for your your region and looking at the 25th percentile and 70th percentile and talking about how to deal with that with your firm. I should also mention, since we're talking about firms, Amber Book has well over 1,000 firms, including most of the firms you know and lots of firms you don't know. Who have enrolled as firm licenses. So what that means is that anyone in the firm can engage Amber Book for free for as long as they need to get licensed. And so if you have an interest in that, you should definitely write to firms at amberbook.com. Generally, what we find is I think most people think that the way that you get a firm license for Amber Book is you're a firm leader and you get one, and we do certainly have a lot of that, but probably 3/4 or more is someone who actually is seeking licensure or has just gotten licensed through Amber Book, usually seeking licensure, and is very persistent with their boss and says, listen, we need this, we need something to help us get licensed. All right. So let's talk about practical experience. So we moved from education, where we talked about schools, into kind of salaries, and there are about 121,000 architects. And to put that in perspective, there are about 1.6 million engineers, although certainly that includes biomedical engineers and software engineers and people who are not aligned in the building trades. But you want to have your mind blown. There are right now 3 million. There are 3 million real estate agents, although that number is likely to come down over the next few years because of a recent court ruling. But there's 121,000 architects and 3 million real estate agents, which is nuts to even think about how few of us there are. Yet there are probably too many of us. The reason, Sal, if you tell me there's 121,000 architects, that doesn't tell me if there's too many or too few. But if you tell me that generally they don't get paid that well compared to other professions like orthodontists or engineers, then that tells me there's probably too many of us, because it's a supply and demand thing. If there's more of us chasing the work, then there's going to be a few too many architects. Go ahead and take a look at this, and then you have 15 seconds, and then I'll ask you to write your headline. All right, go ahead and write your headline. My headline would be, NCARB's headline was the number of U.S. architects increased by 1%. But if you're increasing by 1%, that doesn't seem like a big increase. It basically seems like it's kind of holding steady. So that number seems to be holding steady. I don't know if that's good or bad. You can make your own. Come to your own conclusion. Go ahead and study this for 20 seconds, and then I'll let you know when to make your headline, or you can do it at any time, really. So it's worth noting. So this is the NCARB's headline was a number of candidates increased by 7%. There are more candidates in 2023. You see often that the 2019 numbers are pretty inflated. That's a kind of a echo of a quirk, because in 2018 they changed the exam over from ARE 4.0 to ARE 5.0, and they had, for a brief time, they had a shortcut where you only had to take 5 exams instead of 6 or 7 to get licensed. And so that reflects a surge in people trying to get licensed before that door closed. So the 2019 numbers are a little bit weird. The 2020 numbers are also weird for obvious pandemic reasons. And so, and probably 2021 as well. So, you know, the 2022 and 2023 numbers, and you see this is on the y-axis is the number of licensure candidates. You see how many submitted experience, how many tested and submitted experience, because you have to submit your experience, those hours that you need, and how many tested. It's probably worth noting here that a third of architects are baby boomers. So there's going to be a good number of architects retiring over the next dozen years. A lot of opportunities, I think, for this is an under-known thing. Those of you guys who are kind of mid-career, you might want to talk to your boss about, if your boss is older, you might want to talk to your boss about succession. It turns out it's not that expensive. It's shockingly inexpensive to purchase an architecture firm. And we did an interview in our own kind of, we have a weekly, maybe someone who is with Amberbook who's on the call can put the link up there. But every week we have, or you can go to amberbook.com and look at it yourself, but we have a weekly kind of study session for the exam called 40 Minutes of Competence. It's every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern, and you can just join. You don't have to sign up if you don't want. You can just join the Zoom call. We typically have about 250 people join the Zoom calls, and we've been doing it ever since the pandemic, just to kind of keep people studying. But we had one session in particular where we shared the story. Kind of interviewed a woman who bought her boss's firm, and it was shockingly inexpensive. Generally, the price of an architecture firm is between 1.5 and 2.5 times the cost. I mean, is it EBITDA or revenue? I think it's EBITDA. So it's about 1.5 times to 2.5 times the profit they make in a year. So many architecture firms, small ones, they may be available where you can kind of pay them over maybe 5 years. So you can give them, buy them over the course of 5 years, and then you own them. So you're basically buying them with the profit that you're earning, and then you can have a smooth transition. So anyhow, if I have time, I will, at the end, I'll look up, if you guys are interested, I'll look up the link for that video. It's pretty interesting. All right, go ahead and make your snarky headline here. This is where all of you guys are like almost mandatorily required to make some snark, because this is ridiculous. This is years after university. I think it's funny. I think when you tell folks that you're seeking licensure, I'm pretty sure that people kind of assume that it's like any other profession, like law or medicine, where licensure happens after you're not long, within 6 months or so after you finish your degree. But that is not the case, as you guys know, in architecture. It is on average 7.5 years to complete the AXB. And I'm not sure what that means in ARE, but it's 13 point. Oh, that's how much time it takes between when you either take your first exam or submit your first AXP hours. AXP, of course, is the program that allows you to count your total hours towards licensure. 13.3 years is the average time. That does not include the people who are taking infinity years. In other words, there's a lot of people who are either never going to get licensed or are trying but just don't. So this is just the subset of people who it works out for. And of the people who do get licensed, and there's many who take forever and don't get licensed. It's 13.3 years. This is crazy. This is crazy. There is no reason why we should be waiting this long as a profession on average. Of course, there are individuals who may need to or want to. And of course, you can certainly have a great career without ever being licensed. But the reason that people wait so long is it's really weird because NCARB will change the smallest thing on the exam. So a few months ago, they went from NCARB went from referencing the 2018 IBC code to the 2021 IBC code. And within like 5 days, I probably had 24 emails and a bunch of questions from people like, have you updated the Amber book? And this is a really, really minor change. I mean, it would not affect anyone, whether or not anyone passed or did not pass the exam, this change. But somehow we have, as a profession, just accepted kind of as a vestigial, kind of like our tailbone or appendix, the idea that we should wait a long time to get licensed. And the historical root of that is it used to be, in the 90s and earlier, it used to be you had to wait till you were finished doing your hours before you could first sit for your exams. But now you can sit for your exams in Wisconsin. It seems like you can sit for your exams as an infant, but in most states you can submit for your exams. I think in all states actually you can submit for your exams upon graduation or not long after. And so there's really no reason to wait. And the reasons to do it early are so legion. First of all, you'll make about $500 a month more on average based on that graph. Of the AIA compensation calculator, you'll make about $500 a month average more once you're licensed. So you're giving up $500 a month every month by not being licensed on average. And the reason we do it is because our ancestors did it. They waited a while, so we wait a while. But the problem is, those of you guys who have decided to wait the kind of the 13 years or more, are you more or less busy than you were when you first graduated? And I'm going to guess that most of you are much more busy. All of us are more busy this year than we were last year in general. And so it will never be a better time to get licensed than now. Now, I also find that architects are a little bad at they sometimes pull the ladder up behind them, right? So there's always some dude in your firm who's like, oh, you're getting licensed, you're taking PPD. Oh, I heard that one's a beast. I heard that's a beast of an exam. And you're not really, like, the words he's saying, and it's always a dude, the words he's saying are like he's rooting for you to get licensed, but there's something about the tone where he's not. And so senior architects tend to kind of hoard decision-making sometimes in some firms. And so I would kind of challenge all of us on this call to not be like that when we're senior architects. And if you are pursuing licensure, and maybe you've been graduated for 15 years and you sit next to someone who just graduated and is maybe 6 months out of school, invite them to take the exams, encourage them to take the exams. I think a lot of times people who waited discourage other people in their firms from taking the exams because they figure, well, if I waited, they should have to wait too. But there's really no reason to wait whatsoever. So I think this is shameful. Not that some people take this long, because obviously life gets in the way, but that the average is this long when it doesn't need to be is just shameful. Before I started doing this as an online course, I used to do it. I did 50 intensive 3-day boot camps for different AIA chapters around the country for folks who are seeking licensure and wanted to study. And I found that generally the most common age, so the average age for someone getting licensed is like 33, but that average is misleading. There were a bunch of people in their 20s before they had little kids, and a bunch of people in their 40s after their little kids were a little bit older. So it becomes kind of a purview of the 20s and the 40s. So if you're in your 20s and you're thinking of putting it off to your 30s, know that that's a really tough time typically for people to study, and you may be putting it off longer than you mean to. And I really encourage you to be much more aggressive. At Amber Book, we are the only subscription service that's actually happy when you're done using us. We are thrilled. Even behind the scenes, we're thrilled. We like to get people licensed, so it's kind of our thing. And so we believe that it ought to be way quicker than this. I think a good goal, if you're starting out, a good kind of aspirational goal is to get licensed in 4 or 5 months, or at least do the exams in 4 or 5 months. A good kind of realistic goal is more like 8 months, because you may have to take some retakes. And a good kind of like, well, everything goes wrong goal, maybe like maybe a year and a quarter or something like that, 15 months, 20 months, something like that. That's a good kind of range. I think that NCARB only started publishing this because I asked them to. I actually take a little credit for this because I asked them last year if they would publish this kind of data. Go ahead and take a look at it and go for 15 seconds, and then you can write your headline. All right, write your headline. So this is super interesting because what NCARB was publishing until this year is they were publishing how long it took on average for folks to get licensed, but they weren't telling us. So when universities publish that kind of data, they say, okay, of the people who were freshmen in college 6 years ago, what percentage of them is graduated? And those are very different because how long does it take you to graduate on average is very different because there's some people who never graduate. And so in this case, if we look 5 years back or 10 years back, a little more than a third of people are no longer working towards licensure or are not licensed. So about 40% are licensed. In the 10 years data, about 40% are licensed, 22% are. So I called NCARB and I said, what does this mean? Working towards licensure. And working towards licensure or not just means they either submitted AXP hours or took an exam in the last year. So there's a lot of people who are not, quote unquote, not working towards licensure that may just be taking a year off. Maybe they don't need to submit any more AXP hours, and maybe they're just not taking exams this year because they have a sick relative or something. But generally, you see there's actually there's a significant portion of people who started a long time ago and are not licensed. And I think that's worth knowing when you get into it. I would encourage you to be much more aggressive than most people. The reason that people don't get licensed, by far the most common reason that people don't get licensed, is they don't schedule their exams. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but if you schedule the exams, something will happen where magically you'll study for them once you have them on the calendar. If you're like, oh, I'm going to study, and when I'm ready for them, I'll schedule the exams, that just never happens for people because we're too busy. We're deadline oriented people, architects in particular, but I think humans in general. 4,800 people started reporting experience in their AXP. You can see that number jumps around a bit, but that's because it looks like it's way down this year from last year, but that's misleading because you can now report experience later than you used to be able to. So you can report your older experience, but don't wait too long. I see this all the time for students, all the time in my architecture classes. So, and I should kind of introduce myself. I've been teaching at Virginia Tech for 23 years. I teach design studio, I teach materials and methods of construction, and I teach building systems. But I will tell you, it is so common where students who working during the summers and thinking they'll just report their hours later, find out that later on they get penalized. Sometimes they can only report 50% of their hours. Used to be if you waited too long, you couldn't report any of them. So if there's one assignment that those of you guys who are banking your hours but haven't reported them yet, if there's one thing you can do immediately after this call, it is to start reporting your hours or catch up on reporting your hours, because that is some annoying bookkeeping for most of us, but it's something that you have to just treat like a design problem and just kind of tackle it and be really on top of it. After 5 years, it's gone. At least it used to be. I think now maybe you lose half, but maybe you lose all. So do not wait. There's a statute of limitations. In this case, this is the percent of candidates reporting experience on the y-axis, and of course years on the x-axis. And we're looking at small, medium, large firms or work for multiple firms. The headline for NCARB is that most candidates reporting experience are employed at like small firms. But I'm not really sure that's true when I look at that a little bit more carefully, because work for multiple firms is kind of such a big number. There is I don't want to oversimplify it, but there is a tradition in architecture whereby small firms often hire students it's like a farm team system. The small firms often hire architecture students and give them a few years experience, maybe don't pay them as much, or definitely don't give them as many good benefits. Then the bigger firms will hire people who have, they'll say, we're looking for people with 3 to 5 years experience. It's really ridiculous because the people from the big firms are like, man, we just can't find anyone. I'm like, are you only looking for people with 3 to 5 years experience? They're like, yeah. I'm like, come on, man. You can't, you have to build up the profession just as an obligation to the world and to your profession. You have to, and those of you guys who work in firms, please, give the new people some responsibility. I will tell you that at least at Virginia Tech, they are ready for it, just like you were. And of course, they're going to screw up and not be as good as you are. But after 6 months, 6 weeks, maybe they won't screw up anymore. And it has to start sometime. So do it now. The average candidate, about 5 years it takes to finish the AXP. So when they first start reporting to when they're done, and that number's up. A lot of times the most difficult hours are the ones that involve visiting site visits. It is not a bad idea for you to talk to your colleagues, your bosses, about if you are interested in getting your hours. They will often work with you, but they won't work with you. They're not going to keep track for you. So you need to kind of say, this is what I need. I need more hours in this particular category. Can I work on this particular project, or can I get some more hours on this project in this particular phase of the project, or can I work on this particular aspect of this project? I think in most cases you'll find, I have found that people tell me when they ask their bosses, they're like, oh yeah, I totally get it. We want you to be licensed too, because they often want you to be licensed too, because they can charge more per hour for your time if they're charging by the hour if you're licensed. All right, this is an example from our practice exam in Amber Book. Go ahead and see if you can answer this. Don't put the answer on the chat. Go ahead and do the answer yourself, and just keep it to yourself. You have 2 minutes. You have 30 seconds. All right, so in this case, what we're looking for is an inexpensive, quiet site with southern sun. And that gets you right kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it gets you right where these two red zones overlap. And the kind of below the lake is very steep, and you don't have access to southern sun because of the trees. So south of the lake, planned south of the lake. Over to the right, there's a clearing, but that's very near the highway, so it's going to be noisy. Kind of on the top left quadrant, you can get summer sun, and it's pretty flat, but your driveway is going to have to cross over the stream to get there. And so that's going to require a bridge. It's going to be much more expensive. That's a pretty hard question. It's probably one of the more difficult, questions you would see on the exam, but not atypical. And so those of you guys who haven't started the exam process, this is the kind of thing you'll be seeing. Like I said, this is probably about the hardest question you'd see in terms of difficulty. So it's easier than this, but it's not daunting. This is stuff you can learn and stuff that kind of makes sense when you intuit it or when it's explained to you. So don't wait. All right, so let's talk about the licensure exams. In the last year, there were 13,816 candidates that took the ARE. So that's how many people took the ARE, and about 3,500 completed the exams. I think there's about 6,000 a year who graduate from architecture schools. So that'll give you a sense of the kind of both ends of the pipeline. I think actually we may see that. The average 2023 candidate finished the exams in 2.5 years. And you see that's quicker than 2022 by actually a good deal. But like I said, the average ought to be 8 or 9 months, or maybe 10 months or something like that ought to be the average, or at least the median. Maybe average is a little bit misleading because some people take 15 years, so there's some outliers. Again, that doesn't mean you should feel bad if it took you longer. It's very common, but we need to, as a group, be way more aggressive about taking these exams. If you, the penalty for a failed exam is basically zero. So if you, if in World 1 you schedule the exam tomorrow and you fail it, and in World 2 you schedule the exam, World 2 you don't schedule the exam at all, you just decide you're not ready. In both worlds, the day after tomorrow, you're in the same boat. In World 1, you have a really good practice exam that you failed, so you know the material better, and you're out like $200 and some, which is not nothing. But again, you're losing $500 on average a month by not being licensed. So the 250 is not, should not be that prohibitive to most of you. If you think you're ready, you are ready. Go ahead and stare at this, and you can tell me the headline in 15 seconds. All right, go ahead, put your headline in. Yeah, so we saw there's about 13,000 people who took the exams, but that amounts to about 40,000 exams given. So people obviously who are taking the exams take a lot of exams in a given year. A bunch of them are first attempts, but a significant number, of course, are retakes. You'll remember, about 3,500 passes in a year. So 40,000, so about 1 in 10 test attempts is the last one that they need. So you will, that's right, Jason, try again. That is exactly right. So a failed exam is just not that big a deal. If you have a pass rate of 55%, or now it's up to 58%, and you're doing 8 of these tests, it's just not that big a deal to get a failed exam. People treat it like a car accident. It's more like a parking ticket. So it's just not that big a deal. Go ahead and take a look at this, and in 15 seconds, I'll ask you to give me the headline.
Sorry to interrupt, Michael. I'm loving this, but I just wanted to keep an eye on the time. We've got 7 minutes. We have so many questions, but
sure,
maybe we'll get to
we can go straight to questions.
We can also pass on some questions to you to
sure.
answer as well, if that's okay with you.
Sure, we can absolutely do that. So wrapping up this one, it's probably worth noting that there was a rolling clock where any exam that was more than 5 years old got stale and got thrown out by NCARB. That's no longer the case. So I have a feeling, that some of these numbers are going to change going forward because it's a fairly recent rule. But in general, it's the percent of candidates completing the exam is on the y-axis. And you see a good number, 41% completed in under 2 years. So it's very doable to complete it in under 2 years. It's just that, most people don't, but many, many people do, almost half. Let's go ahead and answer some questions. I think that's a really good idea, Paul.
Sure. Yeah, so many great questions, and certainly we'll not get to all of them today, but yeah, we can actually take the questions out of this platform and pass them over to Amber Book and Michael. So they'll be able to answer a few more if we don't get to all of them. So yeah, there are quite a few people have asked, I think there's 3 or 4 questions about what people can do if they've started out abroad and then they want to come and become an architect.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have any kind of advice on that.
Again, there's a lot of paperwork involved in that. So you're going to have to go, okay, it varies by state, is my understanding. And NCARB has something to do with it as well. But my understanding is, I really recommend, I think there's a certain group of people under a certain age that just don't call people. And that's really a shame because NCARB, I think, still has a phone, people answering the phone. And I think if you call people, you're just much more likely to get like the real skinny. People, they'll tell you what you need to do, and you can ask them questions like, well, okay, when people, of those things that I have to do, which one is the one that trips people up the most, and I should start the earliest, or something like that. And they'll say, oh, you know, a lot of people have trouble getting their record from their home country. I would start that right away, or something like that. So keep in mind, they deal with it, the human beings deal with this all the time. And generally, if you can get someone on the phone, they're much more likely to help you in a more organic way. But in general, know that it happens all the time. Know that they will review, in many states, I think maybe all, they will review your curriculum that you took in your home country. And then they will often tell you, now you have to take, you know, these 4 classes or these 2 classes. So you may have to go back to school for a semester and take a US-based pro practice class, or take a US-based and NAAB accredited class in materials and methods of construction, or something like that. So they will subjectively look through your home country's list of courses that you took, and then identify if there are any holes. And then they will often have special requirements for those folks. And again, it's going to vary by state. But the people who go through it kind of describe it a little bit like a root canal. It's very difficult. It just takes a long time and a lot of persistence. And I know many of you were licensed in your home country because your diploma came pretty much stapled to a license in whatever country you came from. So it's maddening to come here and realize that not only are you not licensed here, but it's not something that you just get with your diploma after arguing a little bit. You're still going to have to take those tests. Now, I will say that beginning about 18 months ago, NCARB began allowing folks who have English as a second language to have an extended time on the tests. If you have English as a second language, take that option. It has changed the test taking experience for so many people who, when they're reading, like you're reading that example question I gave you, it's quite long. And if you're reading it and you're translating it from that language back to Farsi and then back to English in your head, it's obviously going to take you much longer than if you're a native English speaker. So take that extra time. I think they give you like 20% more time, and they allow you to have an English to Spanish dictionary or whatever language you need. Do we have time for one more?
Sure. Somebody asks, any advice for someone going in to take their first exam in person? What might they expect? I think actually LeVar, your Amber Book teammate, has given a really great answer to this, but I'd love to know if you have any additional pieces of advice.
Additional advice to the first exam in person that they're going to take? Yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing, to know is that there is no hack. So the people, I mentioned that the people who don't get licensed are people who don't schedule the exam, but the people who fail the exams, they fail it not because they don't know the super secret NCARB language, or because they don't know, the hack, study hack, or they took the exams in the wrong order. None of that is really relevant. The reason people don't pass is because they don't know enough of the answers, enough of the questions right, which sounds obvious, but there is a yawning amount of information you need to know for these exams, maybe 1,000 things. Each one will take you on average 10 minutes or so to learn, but some will take you an hour, some will take you a minute to learn. And you just need to know those things and be able to apply them. So understand solar geometry and where the sun is, understand how plumbing works, understand the different types of contracts that architects engage with, understand how a pay application works with a contractor, and so forth. And so the way to do well on these exams is to know more. And if you're spending more than 2 or 3% of your study hours strategizing, trying to figure out just the right material to study, or trying to remember the exact thing you had on your last exam, that's a recipe for failure. It's not like that. There was a time where there was a lot of memorization, but over the last 5 years, most of the memorization questions have been culled out of the test item bank that NCARB keeps, And most of the questions that are left are like the one I showed you, where it's not really a memorization, it's more of a higher order reasoning and logic, and that is the way to do well on these exams. But be way more aggressive than you guys are being. Way more aggressive about taking the exams, even if you're not 100% sure you're ready. Who cares? It's just not that big a deal. The sports analogy is like failing an exam is like a holding call in football. Like you would never hear a coach say, I don't want to see any holding calls this game, because your quarterback would be sacked 100 times. Or you would never want to hear, you would never hear a soccer manager say, I don't want any offsides on this game, because you wouldn't have any goals if there were no offsides. So you need to be way more aggressive and just be okay getting a holding call or an offsides call. Now, there was one time where I said, because I'll talk to people who are frustrated by a fail, and I'll say, it's no big deal, just get past it, and I said, what's your sport? And if they say basketball, I say, okay, Steph Curry only shoots 42% from behind the arc. Like, it's okay to fail. It's not that big a deal, but you have to be aggressive. If you have an open shot, you take it. But this one woman, I said, what's your sport? Are you a sports fan? She said, yeah, gymnastics. And I was like, oh man, I got nothing for you. Like, that's the one sport where it's like, you really have to be perfect and you can't do anything. But in general, these exams are not like gymnastics. They are like almost every other sport. They're like tennis, where, you don't worry if you don't get your first serve in. Like, your goal isn't to get every first serve in, because then you're not serving hard enough. And you can use that for any sport, any part of life. You just need to be way more aggressive. This last image is actually, it's an Architizer award that I won for, in addition to my house. It's my bubble wrap house. And so those of you guys who are kind of way in the weeds about, this is the inside of it. Here's the inside of it. Here's the outside of it. Those of you guys who are way in the weeds of this stuff for the profession, I think it's really good. I think most of you guys do this, but it's really good to look at Architizer or open up Dzine, or one that I've been looking at lately a lot is Divisari. D-I-V. How do you spell Divisari? I'm going to put it in the chat. D-I-V-I. Divisari. .com or Dzine or Arc Daily. I think it's really good for the soul to kind of remind ourselves why we do this stuff.
That is such a perfect moment to finish up on. Let's all remember, what the kind of the reward is at the end of the day for clients, but also for us designers. If you can make it to the end and get your first project built, it'll all be worth it, I promise. Thank you so much, Michael. Somebody asked,
thank you, Paul.
Asked if it was your birthday, and I can't.
Oh, today is my birthday. Yeah,
it is Michael's birthday, so everyone can wish him a happy birthday as you go out. And make sure to check out Amber Book. Sign up. Michael and the whole team at Amber Book are incredible people to have on your team as you commence this journey, or as you continue this journey. We'll look forward to having another chat with you very soon, Michael. We'll also send you those other questions, and you can answer a few more via
Sure, and you guys can email info@amberbook.com, and they can answer your questions also.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and thanks again, Michael. Bye for now.